Buried alien spaceship discovered. Then the haunting began. The desert had swallowed cities before. For thousands of years, the basin of Karis had been a graveyard for civilizations that believed themselves eternal. Kingdoms had carved roads through its valleys, raised towers of marble and obsidian, and crowned their rulers beneath banners that once cast shadows across half the known world. Every one of them was gone now. Only the desert remained. Wind moved across the dunes like a living thing, patient and relentless. It buried armies where they stood. It erased trade routes within a generation. Entire capitals vanished beneath shifting oceans of sand until only fragments remained, broken pillars protruding from the dunes like the ribs of ancient skeletons. Historians spoke of lost empires beneath Karis in cautious tones, separating fact from myth as best they could, but even satellites had failed to uncover everything hidden beneath the wasteland. Some ruins were never meant to be found, and that was why the excavation mattered. At dawn, Professor Lena Vale stood at the edge of the main trench with her coat pulled tightly against the bitter desert wind. The rising sun cast long amber light across the excavation site, turning the dunes into waves of molten gold. Far below her, powerful floodlights still burned in the darkness of the pit, illuminating the impossible structure they had uncovered 3 weeks earlier. Workers moved carefully around it like ants surrounding the carcass of some enormous beast. Excavation crews descended by cables and steel ladders into the massive trench, their voices faint beneath the constant groan of generators and drilling equipment. Dust drifted through the air in pale clouds while scanners hummed and survey drones floated silently above the exposed surface. Even now, Lena struggled to comprehend what she was looking at. It was not a temple, it was not a tomb, and it was certainly not human. The object lay buried nearly 300 meters beneath the desert floor, embedded within layers of stone older than recorded civilization. Only a fraction of its structure had been uncovered so far, yet its scale dwarfed anything surrounding it. Smooth black curves emerged from the sand in sweeping arcs, resembling the hull of a colossal ship trapped beneath the earth. No erosion marked its surface. No cracks. No seams. No visible method of construction at all. The material itself unsettled everyone who touched it. Under the floodlights, it appeared darker than obsidian, yet strangely soft around the edges, as though reality itself struggled to define its shape. Light did not reflect from the surface properly. Instead, illumination seemed to sink into it and vanish, swallowed whole by the black metallic skin. Several workers had already refused to go near it after sunset. Lena understood why. The thing radiated wrongness.
Any update from the scanners?
She asked this quietly, never taking her eyes off the structure below. Behind her, boots scraped against metal rungs as Kareem climbed down the access ladder, carrying a tablet pressed tightly against his chest. His face glistened with sweat despite the cold morning air, and excitement trembled visibly through him.
They're getting interior mapping now. The resonance scans penetrated another 60 meters.
He sounded as if he was out of breath. Lena turned toward him sharply.
You found open space?
Kareem nodded quickly and pulled up a rotating schematic on the tablet screen. The image flickered with incomplete wireframes and pulsing lines.
Corridors, multiple levels too. Chambers, conduits, something like transit shafts running through the center. There's an internal structure beneath the outer hull.
Lena studied the display in silence. The patterns did not resemble architecture designed for humans. The corridors curved at impossible angles, intersecting in spirals and asymmetrical geometries that made her eyes ache if she stared too long. Then she noticed the highlighted readings flashing in the corner. Power signatures. Steady. Consistent. Her expression hardened.
Is this residual energy?
Karim hesitated. For the first time since joining the expedition, genuine fear crossed his face.
No, still active.
The words hung in the air between them. Below, machinery continued rumbling while excavation crews brushed centuries of compacted sand away from an enormous circular structure embedded along the exposed hull. The shape resembled a doorway, though there was no visible opening mechanism. Rings of symbols spiraled across its surface in concentric patterns unlike any written language on Earth. They were not engraved. They glowed. Faint silver-blue light pulsed beneath the black material like veins beneath skin, brightening and fading with slow rhythmic precision. Ancient, alien,
and alive.
A deep vibration suddenly rolled through the trench. Workers froze. Dust cascaded from the surrounding walls as several floodlights flickered violently overhead. One of the drones lost stability and crashed against the side of the pit, spinning into darkness below. For a brief moment, the glowing symbols across the structure intensified, illuminating the trench with cold, ghostly light. Then everything stopped. The vibrations ceased. The symbols dimmed again. No one spoke. Lena felt her pulse hammering in her throat. Something inside the structure had responded to them. 3 days later, the world learned the truth. The official announcement triggered chaos almost immediately. Governments attempted calm, insisting the discovery posed no threat, while simultaneously deploying military aircraft across the Karis exclusion zone. Satellite imagery of the excavation leaked online within hours. News networks abandoned normal programming to broadcast continuous coverage from the desert perimeter, calling it the greatest archaeological discovery in human history. Some called it proof humanity was not alone. Others called it the beginning of the end. Religious leaders across the globe proclaimed revelations and omens. Markets surged as technology corporations and private investors poured billions into emergency research initiatives overnight. Universities competed for access to the site, while conspiracy theorists flooded every network with predictions of invasion, awakening, and apocalypse. Meanwhile, beneath the desert of Karis, the buried structure waited in silence. And deep within its endless black corridors, something had already awakened. The people at Site Karis stopped celebrating after the first death. Until then, fear had existed only at the edges of the excavation. Beneath the excitement, beneath the media frenzy and military presence and scientific ambition, there had been unease, but it was manageable, rational. The kind of fear that accompanied any discovery humanity did not yet understand. Morales changed that. Senior technician Daniel Morales had worked maintenance for the excavation since the first week. 42 years old, former Navy engineer, calm under pressure. He was the sort of man who grounded panic simply by entering a room. Even after the discovery of the active power signatures, he remained skeptical of the growing paranoia spreading through the camp.
It's an old machine. Machines malfunction. People scare themselves. That's all this is.
That's what he had told Lena during one briefing. 2 nights later, he vanished. The incident began during a routine diagnostic sweep inside the structure's newly opened lower sector. By then, the excavation teams had managed to breach the circular doorway embedded in the hull after 73 continuous hours of cutting attempts. The opening had not led into a cockpit or burial chamber as many expected, but into a labyrinth of dark metallic corridors, stretching far beneath the desert. The interior defied logic. Walls curved without visible support. Surfaces shifted subtly under changing light, like oil floating atop black water. Some hallways narrowed and widened when observed from different angles, creating impossible perspectives that caused headaches and nausea among mapping crews. Still, the research continued. At 12:14 a.m., Morales entered Corridor 3 alone to repair a failing sensor relay. Security footage captured everything. The recording showed him moving steadily through the passageway, helmet lamp cutting a pale cone through the darkness. His breathing echoed softly through the radio feed, while condensation fogged the inside of his mask. The corridor itself appeared unnaturally smooth, the walls seamless and reflective like polished, volcanic glass. Nothing moved, nothing followed him. Then Morales stopped walking. At first, the technicians monitoring the cameras assumed he had found damage to the relay system. But Morales did not kneel or inspect anything. He simply stood motionless in the center of the corridor. Slowly, he turned his head to the left. Not sharply, carefully, as though listening to someone standing just beyond the camera's field of view. The radio feed crackled. Static flooded the channel in violent bursts before dissolving into something else. A voice, not speaking, singing, low and distant, almost drowned beneath interference. The melody sounded warped and uneven, drifting in and out like sound traveling underwater. No one monitoring the feed could identify the language, or even determine whether it was truly a voice at all. But everyone who heard it described the same sensation afterward. It sounded mournful. Morales whispered something under his breath. Then he began walking again, not back toward the entrance, deeper into the structure. The technicians repeatedly ordered him to respond over comms. He never answered. He moved steadily through the corridor with unnatural calm, disappearing farther into the ship until the camera feed collapsed entirely into static. Hours later, the recovery team found him, or what remained of him. The chamber lay nearly 2 kilometers from the nearest mapped section of the structure. No one understood how Morales had reached it so quickly. The path between the sectors should have taken over 6 hours on foot, even with perfect navigation. The recovery team entered the chamber at 4:37 a.m. Several members vomited immediately. Morales' body lay at the center of the room beneath dim silver light emanating from the translucent black walls surrounding him. Every bone in his body had been crushed inward. His arms folded beneath his torso at impossible angles. His ribcage had collapsed into itself. Even the reinforced plating of his environmental suit looked compressed, as though some colossal force had squeezed him from every direction simultaneously. Yet there were no external injuries, no cuts, no punctures, no burns, only pressure, absolute, catastrophic pressure. And strangest of all, the chamber itself remained untouched. No signs of struggle marked the floor. No blast damage scarred the walls. Instruments detected no radiation spikes, no residual explosives, no gravitational anomalies. The room was pristine, silent, watching. But one detail unsettled the investigators more than the corpse. Behind Morales' remains, symbols had been scorched across the wall in long spiraling patterns unlike any markings previously discovered within the ship. They glowed faintly beneath the surface, burned into the black material from the inside outward, as though the symbols had emerged from within the walls themselves. No tool could replicate the markings. No known heat source could produce them. And when linguists attempted to study the symbols, several reported severe migraines, nosebleeds, and auditory hallucinations after prolonged exposure. One researcher claimed the symbols moved when viewed indirectly. After Morales' death, the atmosphere inside Site Caris changed completely. The excitement vanished. No one laughed in the corridors anymore. Armed guards accompanied research teams everywhere inside the structure, though nobody could explain what weapons were supposed to accomplish against something they could neither identify nor understand. Personnel transfers increased daily. Some workers quit outright and fled the desert before sunrise without collecting their pay. Then the nightmares began. At first, people dismissed them as stress. Crew members woke screaming in the middle of the night after dreaming of endless black corridors beneath the sand. Multiple individuals described the exact same visions despite never speaking to one another beforehand. Towering shadowed chambers, distant singing echoing through darkness, and tall figures standing motionless at the edges of dimly lit rooms. The dreams grew worse over time. Some workers began sleepwalking. Others claimed they heard whispers inside the walls of their quarters after midnight. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways where security cameras showed no movement. Tools disappeared and reappeared in locked rooms. Doors slid open on their own even after power to entire sectors had been disabled. And always, the lights failed when someone was alone. One engineer was found trembling in a storage room after spending nearly an hour trapped in darkness. He refused to speak at first. When Lena finally convinced him to explain what happened, his answer chilled her more than Morales' autopsy report.
I wasn't alone in there.
Lena asked who had been with him. The engineer stared at her with bloodshot eyes. Then he answered in a voice filled with fear.
Something was singing to me.
Then came the whispers. At first, they were subtle enough to dismiss. People heard sounds in empty rooms, soft murmurs buried beneath the hum of generators and ventilation systems. Technicians blamed faulty comms equipment. Psychologists blamed exhaustion. Most of the excavation crew had been working 18-hour shifts for weeks beneath crushing pressure from governments and military overseers. Hallucinations were not impossible. But the whispers spread. Soon, nearly everyone at Site Caris experienced them. Always faint, always nearby, always just behind them. Crew members turned suddenly in deserted corridors, convinced someone had spoken directly into their ear. Linguists reported hearing voices speaking in dead dialects no human tongue should remember. One translator broke down sobbing during a recording session after hearing her deceased mother calling her childhood nickname from inside an empty analysis chamber. There was never anyone there. Security patrols began traveling in pairs after multiple guards reported hearing footsteps matching their own pace through abandoned sectors of the ship. Whenever they stopped moving, the second set of footsteps stopped too, waiting, listening. The psychological strain infected the entire excavation. People slept less. Tempers flared. Researchers developed nervous tics, constantly glancing over their shoulders or staring too long into darkened hallways. Some refused to enter the vessel alone under any circumstances. Then Dr. Elise Navarro submitted her incident report. At 2:13 a.m., Navarro had been cataloging energy fluctuations in Corridor 9 when she noticed movement at the far end of the passage. She initially assumed it was another researcher until the figure stepped partially into the emergency lighting. Tall. Far too tall. Its body appeared unnaturally thin, wrapped in layers of metallic black fabric that hung like strips of liquid metal from its limbs. The material drifted slowly despite the complete absence of airflow. It stood perfectly motionless, watching her. Navarro called out twice over comms, believing someone had entered the restricted sector without authorization. The figure did not respond. Then she realized she could not see its face. There was only darkness beneath the folds surrounding its head. Not shadow, absence. As though the corridor itself bent inward where the being's features should have been. Navarro screamed for security. By the time armed personnel reached the hallway 8 seconds later, the corridor was empty. No doors had opened. No motion sensors activated. The figure had simply vanished. Lena reviewed the footage personally. Nothing appeared on the cameras, except Navarro backing away in visible terror from empty space. But she noticed something the others missed. For 3 frames, the corridor lights dimmed around a shape the cameras could not fully capture. A distortion. A silhouette where reality itself appeared to warp like overheated glass. Something had been standing there. After that, rational explanations began collapsing one by one. The ship itself was changing. For weeks, researchers had struggled to translate the symbols covering the vessel's interior. The language resisted conventional analysis, rearranging grammatical structures faster than machine learning systems could process them. Symbols altered placement between scans. Entire sequences rewrote themselves overnight. Then the systems responded. Without warning, the walls began moving, not mechanically, organically. Researchers watched in stunned silence as glowing symbols across corridor 4 slowly shifted position when approached, rearranging themselves into entirely new patterns like living circuitry responding to observation. Black metallic surfaces rippled subtly beneath human touch. Sections of dormant architecture awakened room by room throughout the vessel, pulsing with dim blue light beneath the walls like veins carrying blood through flesh. The ship was not dead. It had been sleeping. Every day afterward, more systems activated, doors sealed and reopened on their own schedules. Elevation shafts began functioning despite no visible power source. Deep inside the vessel, massive structures rotated silently beneath the desert floor, producing vibrations strong enough to rattle equipment across the excavation site. Then they found the central archive. The chamber opened after a 12-hour sequence of cascading system activations triggered throughout the lower sectors. Massive black doors separated down the center without sound, revealing a vault so enormous the floodlights could not fully illuminate its ceiling. Thousands of upright capsules stood inside, row after endless row, each towered nearly 4 meters high, constructed from the same translucent black material found throughout the vessel. Pale blue light glowed faintly within some of them, illuminating shapes hidden beneath layers of frost-like condensation. Most were empty, others had been destroyed from the inside. Cracks split their surfaces outward, as though whatever had once occupied them had forced its way free long ago. Dark residue stained the floors around shattered capsules in patterns disturbingly similar to dried blood. Lena walked slowly between them in horrified silence. An entire species had slept here once, and something catastrophic had awakened them. Then Kareem stopped walking.
Professor Vale.
He was visibly trembling as he spoke. At the center of the chamber stood one capsule still functioning. Its pale internal glow pulsed steadily through the translucent shell. Frost drifted across its surface in delicate spirals, while internal mechanisms emitted low rhythmic vibrations deep within the floor. Something moved inside. Slowly, a shape shifted behind the black glass, long limbs unfolding. Lena felt every instinct in her body scream at her to run. Instead, she stepped closer. The military intervened immediately after receiving Lena's report. Colonel Adrian Rice arrived in the archive chamber within minutes, surrounded by armed personnel in sealed tactical armor. One look at the active capsule convinced him the excavation had crossed into something far beyond archaeology.
We must seal this chamber now.
Lena turned toward him in disbelief.
You can't be serious.
I'm completely serious.
She pointed toward the capsule.
But if there's a survivor in cryostasis?
Rice interrupted sharply.
It isn't a survivor. Whatever happened here destroyed an entire civilization. We don't know what this thing is.
Which is exactly why we study it.
We need to contain it.
Lena stepped closer to the glowing capsule, despite the soldiers raising their weapons instinctively.
You don't bury the greatest discovery in human history because you're afraid.
Rice's expression darkened.
No. You bury it because fear keeps people alive.
Then came the screaming. Lena ran through chaos, illuminated only by pulsing red emergency strobes. Workers fled from the excavation pit in blind panic, while soldiers shouted contradictory orders into radios filled with static. Somewhere nearby, automatic gunfire erupted briefly before cutting off mid-burst. The ground moved beneath her feet. Not an earthquake, something else. The desert around the trench rippled violently, like liquid beneath the moonlight. Waves moved through the dunes in enormous circular patterns, as though colossal shapes swam beneath the sand itself. A worker stumbled near the edge of the pit. The sand beneath him collapsed instantly. He vanished screaming into the dunes as unseen force dragged him downward. Soldiers rushed forward, but the surface sealed shut behind him like water swallowing a stone. Another man was lifted suddenly into the air. For one horrifying second, he hung suspended above the excavation equipment, limbs twitching violently. Then something invisible hurled him sideways. His body struck a drilling platform with enough force to rupture organs instantly, spraying blood across steel machinery. People began firing wildly into the darkness. The screaming stopped. One by one, terrified workers stared upward toward the center of the excavation pit. Something floated there, tall, motionless, wrapped in long strips of metallic black cloth that drifted around its body without wind. It hovered several meters above the ground. Its face remained hidden beneath a smooth silver mask, divided by a single vertical line of pale blue light, glowing softly from forehead to chin. The mask contained no mouth, no eyes, no expression remotely human. And yet everyone looking at it felt the same unbearable certainty. It was looking directly at them. The being did not walk. It glided. Every electronic device near it failed instantly. Radios screamed with feedback before dying. Helmet lights flickered out. Weapon systems malfunctioned in soldiers' hands. Then the voices could be heard, not through speakers, inside their minds. People collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads as memories flooded through them. Vast oceans beneath black skies, cities burning across alien worlds, stars vanishing one by one into impossible darkness. Lena saw towering civilizations crumble beneath storms of ash, while countless figures knelt before enormous shadowed shapes standing at the edge of extinction. And through every vision, one presence remained constant, watching, waiting, ancient beyond comprehension, terribly alone, and filled with unimaginable fury. Lena survived because the thing paused when it saw her. All around the excavation site, panic consumed what remained of Site Caris. Soldiers fired blindly into darkness. Vehicles overturned in the sand. Emergency sirens wailed and died beneath violent waves of static. The desert itself seemed alive now, rippling in enormous circular motions around the exposed vessel as though something vast moved beneath the dunes. Yet at the center of the chaos, the entity remained perfectly still. It hovered above the trench in absolute silence while gunfire erupted from every direction. Assault rifles thundered. Mounted turrets opened fire from the perimeter. Bright tracer rounds streaked through the darkness toward the floating figure. None of them reached it. Lena watched in disbelief as bullets slowed midair several meters from the being's body. Metal glowed red-hot, warped, and liquefied before falling harmlessly onto the sand in molten droplets. The creature did not even acknowledge the attack. Its attention had settled entirely on her. The pale blue line running vertically through its silver mask brightened slowly, casting cold light across the folds of metallic black cloth drifting around its body. Lena felt an unbearable pressure build inside her skull. Then the voice was heard, not through sound, not through language, but through thought itself.
You opened the grave.
The words slammed into her consciousness with crushing force. Lena staggered backward, collapsing to one knee as agony exploded behind her eyes. Around her, the world vanished beneath an avalanche of visions pouring directly into her mind. Stars. Endless stars. She saw a civilization unlike anything humanity had ever imagined. Towering black cities suspended above oceans of silver mist. Vast structures orbiting dead suns. Millions of beings, wrapped in flowing metallic garments, moving through luminous halls beneath constellations unknown to Earth. Ancient, beautiful, dying. The images came faster. War. Planets burning beneath impossible weapons that twisted gravity and light itself. Entire moons shattered apart like brittle glass. fleets of colossal vessels fleeing through darkness between galaxies, while something enormous pursued them from the void beyond stars. Not an empire, not a species, a hunger. She could not fully comprehend what hunted them. Her mind recoiled every time the visions approached it directly. She saw only fragments, vast shadowed forms moving between dimensions, extinguishing suns as they passed. Worlds fell silent in their wake. The alien species had run, for centuries, perhaps millennia, until only one ship remained, the vessel beneath Charis. She saw it crossing unimaginable distances through empty interstellar darkness, carrying the final survivors of a dying civilization inside cryostasis chambers. Desperation echoed through every memory. Fear, exhaustion, grief so immense, it poisoned entire generations. Then came the crash. The ship tore through Earth's atmosphere thousands of years ago, in flames visible across ancient skies. It struck the desert with catastrophic force, burying itself beneath mountains of sand and stone. Systems failed, chambers ruptured. Most of the survivors died instantly. The rest died slowly afterward. Lena felt their final days. The endless darkness beneath the desert, the silence, the failing life support systems, the realization that no rescue would ever come. One by one, the species vanished inside the buried ship while the last surviving guardian remained awake among the dead, watching over tombs, listening to the voices of an extinct people echo through empty corridors for thousands of years. Alone, always alone, waiting for the universe itself to forget they had ever existed.
This world was meant to forget us.
The words echoed through her mind with terrible sorrow, and beneath that sorrow, rage. Lena gasped for breath as the visions finally slowed. Blood trickled from her nose, while the excavation site gradually returned around her in shattered fragments of sound and light. The entities still hovered above the trench, motionless, ancient beyond comprehension. Its mask turned slowly toward the open cryostasis chamber, deep below the excavation pit where pale blue light still pulsed from the single active capsule. In that moment, understanding struck Lena with horrifying clarity. The thing haunting the ship was not a ghost. It was not some extra-dimensional invader awakened by the excavation. It was the ship's last surviving occupant, the final guardian of a dead civilization. And isolation had destroyed its mind long ago. Thousands of years, buried beneath the desert surrounded by the corpses of its species, had twisted grief into something monstrous. The whispers in the corridors, the visions, the psychic intrusions, they were not deliberate hauntings. They were leakage, fragments of memory bleeding outward from a consciousness too old, too powerful, and too broken to contain itself anymore. The being drifted slightly higher above the excavation, strips of black metallic cloth curling around its body like living shadows. Then Lena felt something else inside its mind beneath the madness. Fear. Not fear of humanity. Fear of what had followed them across the stars. The entity looked upward into the night sky, and for the first time since the nightmare began, Lena realized something infinitely worse than the creature itself might still exist somewhere beyond Earth. Still searching, still hungry. And now, because humanity had awakened the ship, it might know where they were. Over the next 48 hours, Site Charis descended into catastrophe. What began as panic became systematic annihilation. The desert itself turned hostile first. Massive sandstorms formed without warning around the excavation zone, spiraling outward in towering walls that blotted out the sun and swallowed entire convoys whole. Winds screamed across the dunes with unnatural force, carrying static-charged particles that stripped paint from vehicles and flayed exposed skin raw within seconds. 3 evacuation helicopters attempted departure at dawn on the first day. None escaped. Personnel at the command tower watched helplessly as the aircraft vanished into the storm clouds surrounding Caris. Moments later, their radar signatures distorted violently before disappearing entirely. Hours afterward, wreckage began falling from the sky. Twisted metal rained across the desert in burning fragments spread over kilometers of dunes. One cockpit crashed near the perimeter fence with both pilots still strapped inside. Every bone in their bodies had been folded backward. Inside the excavation site, reality deteriorated further. Machinery activated without power. Excavation drills roared to life in abandoned sectors. Elevators descended into the depths of the ship, carrying no passengers. Floodlights flickered in synchronized pulses resembling a heartbeat spreading through the site. Then people started disappearing. At first it was isolated incidents. A security team entered Corridor 12 and never returned. Search parties sent after them discovered the hallway had physically changed shape. The original passage no longer existed. In its place stretched a smooth black corridor, descending deeper underground at an angle impossible according to every architectural scan. The ship was rearranging itself. Lena witnessed it happen firsthand during an evacuation attempt through the eastern sectors. One moment, a maintenance corridor extended normally toward the surface lifts. The next, the hallway elongated, not mechanically, spatially. The walls stretched outward into impossible distance, while the ceiling rose slowly higher above them. Emergency lights receded farther away with every step, until the corridor resembled an endless tunnel vanishing into darkness. Several researchers panicked and ran. They never reached the end. Other corridors looped back into themselves. Teams walked for hours only to emerge from the exact doorway they had entered minutes earlier. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably throughout the vessel. Entire chambers rotated 90 degrees without warning, sending people tumbling sideways into walls that had abruptly become floors. One soldier fell upward into darkness after a gravity inversion opened above him like an invisible abyss. His screams continued for nearly 30 seconds before stopping suddenly. No impact was ever heard. The psychological collapse came next. Researchers exposed to prolonged contact with the ship deteriorated rapidly. Some developed severe paranoia, insisting invisible figures followed them through reflective surfaces. Others stopped speaking entirely, spending hours staring upward at ceilings, while whispering numbers in unknown languages. Then came the eyes. Dr. Helen Ortez locked herself inside a laboratory bathroom after suffering what colleagues initially believed was a psychotic break. Security personnel forced the door open 20 minutes later. They found her sitting calmly beside the sink. Blood covered the walls. Her own fingernails had torn both eyes from their sockets. Even blind, she continued staring upward with a peaceful smile spread across her face.
I can still see them. The stars are looking back.
3 more incidents followed before medical teams began sedating anyone reporting hallucinations. It made no difference. The voices penetrated dreams, unconsciousness, even chemically induced comas. Patients woke screaming about vast shapes moving between galaxies and black oceans filled with dead suns. Some begged to be killed before it noticed them. None could fully explain what it was, only that the alien guardian feared it more than death itself. By the second night, Colonel Rice abandoned containment protocols entirely. Military engineers began preparing thermobaric charges throughout the excavation site, while evacuation transports assembled beyond the storm perimeter. The official objective changed from research to eradication. Destroy the vessel, bury it permanently beneath the desert. Lena knew it would not work. She had seen the ship healing itself. Damaged corridors regenerated within hours. Melted surfaces flowed back together seamlessly, like living tissue repairing wounds. Entire sections of the hull closed over explosive breaches before engineers could re-enter them. The vessel was alive in ways humanity barely understood. Worse still, the guardian entity was becoming stronger. At first, it had appeared only sporadically throughout the excavation. Brief manifestations, psychic intrusions, flickering glimpses between corridors. Now it moved freely through the structure like a consciousness reconnecting with its own body. The ship responded to its presence instantly. Doors opened before it arrived. Systems activated in cascading waves around it. Blue light pulsed through the walls whenever it approached, spreading beneath the black surfaces like electrical signals, racing through a colossal nervous system. It was no ghost. It was integrated into the vessel itself, a living component of the ship. Or perhaps the ship had become an extension of its mind, and that mind was unraveling. The answer finally came from Kareem. Exhausted and half delirious, he spent nearly 17 uninterrupted hours inside the central archive, analyzing the shifting symbols embedded throughout the chamber walls. By then, the translation systems had evolved far beyond simple linguistic interpretation. The symbols were not merely writing. They were data structures, memory architecture. The ship had not carried passengers alone. It had carried minds, thousands of them. Kareem discovered layered consciousness patterns embedded throughout the vessel systems, digitized neural imprints preserved inside the glowing symbolic networks, running through every corridor and chamber. The alien species had recorded themselves before death, transferring fragments of memory, identity, and thought into the ship itself. The vessel was a tomb, a library, a mausoleum of preserved consciousness drifting silently beneath the desert for thousands of years. Every whisper heard within the corridors came from them.
The dead.
Lena stared at the translation feed in horror as Kareem continued explaining.
The Guardian wasn't protecting the ship, it was protecting its occupants.
He gestured toward the endless walls of glowing symbols surrounding the archive.
Their entire civilization is still here.
Millions of fragmented thoughts drifted through the vessel systems like ghosts trapped inside circuitry. Echoes of fear,
Grief.
memory,
Rage.
all endlessly replaying across millennia of isolation beneath the earth. And only one living being had remained awake among them. One survivor listening to the voices of its dead species for thousands of years without silence, without escape, without hope. Lena finally understood the whispers, the hallucinations, the madness infecting everyone inside Site Caris. The Guardian's fractured consciousness had merged with the ship's network long ago. The dead minds surrounding it whispered endlessly through the systems until grief itself became contagious. Human minds entering the vessel were being overwhelmed by psychic residue accumulated across millennia. The ship was haunted not by one entity, but by an entire extinct civilization unable to truly die.
It thinks we're grave robbers.
The two of them stood alone inside the central archive, while the ship trembled around them like a living thing in pain. Blue light pulsed through the walls in slow rhythmic waves, illuminating the endless rows of shattered cryostasis chambers surrounding them. Somewhere far above, distant explosions echoed through the vessel as military teams attempted to collapse entire sectors with explosives. The ship repaired the damage, faster than they could inflict it. Lena stared at the flowing symbols racing across the archive walls while translation algorithms struggled to keep pace. The language no longer felt alien now. Not entirely. Prolonged exposure to the vessel had changed something in her perception. She no longer merely read the symbols. She felt them. Grief saturated every line. Memory. Warning.
But that's precisely what we are.
Kareem looked at her with hollow, exhausted eyes. He had not slept in nearly 2 days. Blood vessels had burst across the whites of his eyes from repeated psychic exposure to the ship's network. Yet he kept translating, because now they understood what Site Caris truly was. not a crash site, a prison. The final translation sequence activated without warning. Every symbol across the archive walls brightened simultaneously, flooding the chamber with blinding blue-white light. The floor vibrated beneath their feet, while enormous structures deep within the ship began shifting position. Then the message appeared, not in words alone, in meaning. The vessel had not come to Earth seeking refuge. Its inhabitants had not been fleeing extinction. They had been containing it. Something aboard the ship had survived whatever annihilated their civilization. Something so dangerous an entire species chose exile beneath an alien desert rather than risk unleashing it elsewhere. The Guardian had never protected the dead from intruders. It had protected the universe from what slept below. Kareem staggered backward as the implications settled over them.
Oh, sweet God, no.
The deepest chamber opened shortly before dawn. No one issued commands. No controls were activated. The ship simply decided. Throughout the lower sectors, black metallic walls began unfolding in vast, synchronized movements. Corridors separated apart like living tissue peeling open. Entire chambers rotated downward into darkness, while unseen mechanisms groaned deep beneath the desert floor. Lena and Kareem followed the movement through collapsing passageways until they reached the edge of a colossal opening, descending beneath the excavation. The sight stole Lena's breath. Far below stretched a perfect spherical chamber, larger than a cathedral, suspended at the absolute center of the buried vessel. The walls pulsed with dim organic light, while thick black tendrils spread across the floor in branching patterns, like veins feeding toward the structure, suspended in the center. A cocoon, massive, floating weightlessly above an abyss. Its surface appeared translucent and wet, formed from layers of shifting black material that moved slowly as though breathing. Pale light pulsed deep within it in irregular rhythms. And inside, something moved, larger than any human. Long limbs curled inward around a torso too elongated to belong to any earthly creature. Its silhouette shifted subtly behind the cocoon walls, growing larger with each pulse of light.
It was not asleep. It was developing.
The Guardian descended slowly toward it. For the first time since the nightmare began, the entity moved with purpose rather than rage. Its strips of metallic cloth drifted behind it like funeral banners as it glided reverently toward the suspended cocoon. Then it reached upward and removed its mask.
Lena wished it had not.
Beneath the silver faceplate existed something trapped between life and death. Its skin stretched tightly across elongated bone structures that no longer fully resembled a living organism. Veins of pale blue light pulsed visibly beneath translucent flesh, intertwined with black mechanical implants fused directly into its skull and jaw. Its eyes were gone. In their place burned hollow sockets, leaking streams of blue luminescence, like liquid fire spilling endlessly down its ruined face. Decay and machinery had become inseparable, a corpse animated by grief alone. And when the Guardian looked directly at Lena, she understood the true horror at last. It was terrified, not of humanity, not of the excavation, not even of death. It feared the thing inside the cocoon. The realization struck her harder than any vision the ship had forced into her mind. This being had survived the collapse of worlds. It had endured thousands of years entombed beneath the desert among the voices of its dead civilization. And still, this was what frightened it. The Guardian's ruined gaze shifted toward the cocoon.
It is waking.
The words entered Lena's skull in a trembling whisper, filled with despair so profound it barely resembled language anymore. The cocoon twitched. A crack spread slowly across its surface, thin at first, then widening. Black fluid dripped soundlessly into the abyss below. Another crack appeared, then another. Deep within the cocoon, something unfolded. Lena felt it immediately, an awareness touching the edges of her mind vast enough to eclipse everything she had experienced inside the ship. The whispers of the dead vanished instantly beneath its presence, like insects falling silent before a predator.
Ancient, hungry, awake.
All throughout the vessel, the preserved consciousnesses began screaming. The sound erupted through the ship's systems in psychic waves so intense Lena collapsed to her knees, clutching her skull. Thousands of voices cried out simultaneously in terror and agony. The walls flashed violently with corrupted symbols, while the chamber itself trembled beneath catastrophic structural failure. The Guardian turned toward her one final time. Blue fire spilled from its hollow eyes.
Forbid the stars from ever finding this place.
Then it screamed, not in rage, not in hatred, in despair. The sound tore through the chamber like reality itself breaking apart. Every wall inside the ship ruptured simultaneously. Black tendrils recoiled violently from the cocoon, while enormous fractures spread through the spherical chamber. Far above, the desert began collapsing inward as buried structures failed beneath the strain. The Guardian hurled itself toward the cocoon. Light consumed everything. Lena remembered fragments afterward. Kareem dragging her through collapsing corridors while the ship folded inward around them. Soldiers firing into impossible darkness. Entire sections of the vessel imploding beneath waves of molten blue energy erupting from the depths below. The desert itself exploded. Officially, the disaster at Site Caris was attributed to seismic instability and catastrophic reactor failure involving experimental excavation equipment. The resulting detonation vitrified several kilometers of desert into blackened glass, visible from orbit for weeks afterward. Sand swallowed what remained of the site beneath collapsed dunes and molten stone. No wreckage was ever recovered. No bodies were officially identified. Governments denied all extraterrestrial involvement despite thousands of witnesses. Records disappeared. Survivors signed silence agreements under military supervision before being scattered across different countries under new identities. Most people accepted the explanation because the alternative was unbearable. Professor Lena Vale never returned to archaeology. Years later, she still woke suddenly in the middle of the night with blood pounding in her ears and the taste of desert dust in her mouth. And sometimes, in the moments between sleep and waking, she heard the song. Low, distant, mournful, the same impossible melody from Morales' final recording, calling softly from somewhere deep below the Earth's surface. In her dreams, she stood once more at the edge of the Caris Basin, under a dead black sky. The dunes stretched endlessly before her, while something enormous moved slowly beneath the sand far below. Not dead, not sleeping, listening, waiting patiently in the dark for anyone foolish enough to dig again. And above the desert, beyond the stars, something else was listening too. If you enjoyed this tale, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. It would mean the world to us.